Yet another perspective and another professional, Dr. Henry Steadman. He has been the president of Policy Research Associates, Inc. since he founded in 1987. His work has resulted in 8 books, over 130 journal articles in a wide range of professional journals, 20 chapters, and numerous reports. Dr. Steadman received his BA and MA in sociology from Boston College and his PhD in sociology from the University of North Carolina.
Good morning. First of all, let me answer the question that was posed. In fact, there is pretty consistent data in terms of who gets into mental health courts. And I think the question is, compared to the people who are booked into your jail, is the disproportionate representation by the people that get into mental health courts when you compare people that are booked into the jail. Older, white women are who get into mental health courts. That when you look, most jail populations, 10 to 15%, are in fact women. About 50% of all the people in mental health courts are women. If you look at the age, the average age of people booked into U.S. jails is probably around 25 years of age, a lot of young people. You look at people, every mental health court data I've ever seen, 35, 36 years old. And if you look at race, persons of color are underrepresented in terms of people that get into mental health courts. So that's the answer to the question. My job this morning was to talk about diversion specifically as an alternative and how it would impact on people's involvement in the criminal justice system. I'm going to try and do 4 things. And as I was driving to the airport to come here, I had Sirius on, listening to 50s on 5, and I heard a song, I think it's Jerry Lee Lewis, and I said, that's what I'm going to try and do. It's breathless. I'm strap on, I got a lot of data. It's easy data. It's not complicated data, but to try and give you, first of all, some basic facts that I think everybody who's interested in these issues ought to have at your fingertips. Then a quick tool or framework for thinking about the issues that we have found very useful at trying to do practical community-based solutions. Then some numbers in terms of what can you say about the effectiveness of diversion. And at the end, I'm going to say something that's very controversial. But my thought is, why do you want to come to a conference and everybody's saying the same thing and feeling good about each other? I think we ought to have a little, mix up a little bit. So I'll try that at the end. Okay. There are about today, this is the most recent number, but about 7 million people under correctional supervision in the U.S. The public has it all wrong in terms of where they are. About 750,000 in jail. About 1.25 million in prison. So where are the rest? They're in the community. 5 million of the 7 million people in the United States who are under correctional supervision are under supervision of probation and parole. So the vast majority of people under correctional supervision are in the community, and that's an important thing. However, when we talk about jails, 750,000 people today, about 13 million people are booked into U.S. jails. Jails churn people. They come and they go. They churn, they churn, churn. They're not like prisons. So in understanding where the jail fits in this, it's important to understand that difference. If you look at the prevalence rates of serious mental illness, study that we did with Fred Osier and the CSG, we looked at 5 jails in 2002 and 2006. We looked at serious mental illness. We looked at people being booked into the jail. Did a standardized screen and assessment of people being booked into these jails. We said, what's the prevalence in the last month of symptoms of serious mental illness? What came out? Among the men being booked into the jail, about 15%, the women, 31%. Women's rates of depression, way higher than the men. So about twice as many women as men proportionally booked into U.S. jails. So what does that mean in terms of the public policy issues that we're dealing with? 13 million people booked into jail. About 15% of the men, 31% of the women have serious mental illness when they're booked into the jail. That's not during the jail stay. That's when they come into the front door of the jail. That means there are about 2 million people a year booked into U.S. jails with serious mental illness. It's a lot of people, and it's a lot of people being churned. These data from Linda Teplin, who you'll hear from later, one of her very important early articles from Cook County Jail. This is still the best data that exists. And the take-home message is the bottom. Of the people identified when they were booked into the Cook County Jail who had serious mental illness, 3/4, 72%, have a co-occurring substance use disorder. So that the people that we're talking about diversion for here, who have serious mental illness, the vast majority, in every study I've ever seen, of people in the criminal justice system, it's always 75, 80, 85%. It's the usual. They have co-occurring substance use disorder if they have serious mental illness. The other thing that was mentioned earlier, and this data is from a jail diversion study of 14 sites, where we looked at prevalence of physical and sexual abuse among men and women who were diverted. And what you see, does this pointer work? Oh, that turned it off. Okay, yeah, it does work. Okay, lifetime prevalence of physical and sexual abuse. Among the women, 93%. Not surprising. Physical abuse, sexual abuse. What people don't think about is the male population. 90% of the men. It's not a women's issue. Trauma is not a women's issue. It's an issue for everybody with serious mental illness who has co-occurring substance use disorders who are booked into the criminal justice system. It's the trifecta. What we have is what you all know. That's what we're here to talk about. We have this cycle of people who come in contact with the criminal justice system, who have serious mental illness, have co-occurring substance use disorder, and they have trauma issues universally for all intents and purposes. No place fits them. They get arrested, they get incarcerated, they go back to the community, they may have some inpatient treatment, probably not today. They may be in a private home, group residence, on the street, in shelter, and they just cycle and they bump back and forth, and boom, they get arrested. And that's what we're talking about. One of the labels that they pick up along the way is that they're treatment-resistant clients. And I would argue, if you look at the systems that you're working in and that these people have experienced, that it isn't an issue, by and large, of treatment-resistant clients. It's a problem of client-resistant services. And that's what this is all about. And when we start talking about what is diversion, how do you develop a system, it's how do you create a system that isn't client-resistant? And that's what I'd like to move to. That's the end of phase one. Are you breathless? Phase two, what about a tool to think about it, a roadmap? And something that we came up with is hope it shows well here. Oh, it's a good colorful picture. This is something that we call a sequential intercept map. It's Patty Griffin and Mark Munitz, working with the Gain Center over the years, developed this as a tool to think about the issues, particularly as it relates to diversion. It's called sequential because when you look at the criminal justice system, it is rather sequential, and it's broken, and sometimes it doesn't work the way we would like. But basically, what we identified was 5 points in the criminal justice system where people could be intercepted with the fundamental proposition of what you're trying to do is minimize the penetration into the system of people who don't need to be there. In this instance, people with serious mental illness or mental illness at all. So the intercept 1 is law enforcement. Intercept 2 is initial detention. So charges are not filed here. To get to intercept 2, charges are filed. Intercept 3 is, in fact, when they aren't diverted at initial arraignment. In fact, they're sitting in jails and in specialty courts. This is where the mental health court box would be. In the disposition, they go to prison and jail, and then you have reentry issues. And then under community corrections, is intercept 5, you have parole and probation. One of the things that when we first drew this picture to help us think about it and to try and work with communities and say, let's do some strategic planning. Let's figure out where we can put our resources to intercept people, to prevent them from coming through the system. We didn't have this arrow from probation and parole. And one of the things that we found, and probably in the diversion area in the last 5 to 10 years, one of the big initiatives has been to think about probation especially, less so parole, but probation, not as the back door, but it's the front door of the jail. And that for people with serious mental illness, their technical violation rates are so much higher than probation is generally that, in fact, diversion needs to focus on what do you do in community corrections to prevent people from unnecessarily being violated and coming back into jail and prison when, in fact, if you did something in community corrections, you could avoid that. So this is the sequential, this is a sequence, intercept. Where can we intercept? And what I'm going to do with the data I'm going to present in the next few minutes is what do we know about the effectiveness of diversion at each of these intercepts. I don't have anything in intercept 4 because there's not much out there. And give you a hint of what the data in terms of, does it work? Does diversion work? But first of all, let's define it, because the way I use the term, diversion means avoiding or radically reducing jail time by using community-based treatment as an alternative. Now, one of the things, and it's true in this room, I'm pretty certain, based on what I've heard about who's here today, it's one of those terms that is used differently by criminal justice professionals and behavioral health professionals. What does it mean? As it's used in the criminal justice system, diversion typically has meant not filing or dropping charges. So that when a family member, when a behavioral health professional starts to talk to a criminal justice professional about, let's do diversion, they immediately see bleeding heart liberals who don't want charges filed. Because that's how it's typically used in the criminal justice system. In fact, when it's used in the context of diversion programs as avoiding or radically reducing jail time, in fact, there's a whole array of other options that are much more attractive to prosecutors in the judiciary that are used in jail diversion programs. Charges may not be filed, pre-booking diversion at Intercept 1. It may be at Intercept 2 a condition of bail. It may be deferred prosecution. I saw one mental health court where they had to stipulate to the police report. That was their way of admitting to some of the facts of what happened before they could get into the mental health court. Sometimes there's a sentence imposed but deferred the sentencing. Sometimes you have to get into these diversion programs, you have to plead out, and as a condition of conditions of probation, you in fact get into in the mental health court. That's most mental health courts, that's the mechanism. It's highly variable, as David was saying, but it's variable. But all of these options are used so that when you talk about diversion and you're trying to put together a working coalition or you get some people you're trying to sell this idea to, if you are, you've got to realize that it's used differently between criminal justice and mental health. Let's skip that. This is how we think about, we at the Gaines Center, think about what diversion is. And again, it's just a useful schematic that we've come up with that I'd like to get out there in terms of facilitating the conversation the rest of today and tomorrow. It's a three-stage model. And again, people, when they think about diversion, we talked about the categories. Dr. Southard started with categorical mix-ups, if you will. Well, this is a model to try and help think clearly about what diversion is. And what diversion is the first thing you've got to do is you've got a target group. It's a group that it's a public policy decision in your community. Who's the prosecutor going to accept? Who's the judge going to accept? And you have to negotiate who's the target group. Is it misdemeanors? Misdemeanors are nonviolent felons. Misdemeanors, nonviolent felons, felons that the victim approves. And that's negotiated with the prosecutor. And then there's a set of clinical conditions. There's going to be Axis 1 disorders, Axis 1 and Axis 2, the state mental health authority's definition of who's the priority population for funding in your state. It's negotiated. And so you've got a target group of people you're trying to find, people you're trying to intercept. And you're trying to figure out where in your system you're going to intercept them. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to find them, and then you have to figure out how to screen and assess and enroll them. And as an aside, this enrollment issue, when it comes to the Affordable Care Act and some of the expansions of Medicaid reimbursement with the 133% poverty level, one of the biggest questions that resolve in terms of is it going to make a difference is how you're going to enroll people. And enrollment of people in these community-based programs when they've come in contact with the justice system is a challenge. So the first thing you do in diversion is identify and enroll. Then the next thing that happens is linkage. And again, this is often muddled. Roughly, there's no survey that's been done, but roughly 90% of the programs in the United States that do jail diversion do not provide services. They link people to services and as existing community-based providers. So when people say, we want to evaluate the diversion program, we want to see what they do, if they're effective, well, the reality is this is diversion stage one. You find them, you enroll them. The way you enroll them is you offer them a deal. And David talked a little bit about the negotiation and the public defender deciding whether they want to take a deal to enter the mental health court and how voluntary is voluntary. But basically, you give them a deal, and they decide whether they want to take it or not. And if they do, they're enrolled, and they're linked to community-based services. And then the intervention starts. And the reality is, if you look at diversion programs, it isn't that difficult to do stage one. But the ultimate question in diversion is, diversion to what? If you don't have stage two and stage three, you're not going to get improved mental health individual outcomes, and you're not going to get improved public safety outcomes. And this is the intervention, the comprehensive and appropriate community-based services. So when we talk about diversion, you've really got to be clear. Now, some mental health courts have funding for services. Most don't. They're linking people. They may have a boundary spanner who navigates the system, sets up a treatment plan, and refers people. In Judge Lindley's court, which I've met her, but I haven't been at her court, in fact, that's why everybody's there, because they're linking them to all of those county-based services and there's Veterans Affairs services. That's what's the linkage. The court doesn't have the money for that. The court is the linkage. So that this is what it's all about. And where the logic model for diversion is, if in fact we can identify people and enroll them, if we can link them to appropriate, comprehensive, and appropriate community-based services, their symptoms will be reduced, the level of functioning will go up, the housing stability will increase, their family stability will increase, and they will stay out of trouble. That's the logic model. Now, shortly I'm going to jump into some data to say, does it work? Do you get these, and do you get these? And where I'm not going to get to today, so I'll give you the punchline at the beginning. And Jennifer Scheme in her presentation later will really delve into this. They're ultimately, and again, this may sound anathema, the reality is the data we have show no relationship between improved mental health outcomes and public safety outcomes. They're independent outcomes. People may or may not get better, and some people whose symptoms aren't reduced a lot, the level of functioning it doesn't go up a whole lot, still have reduced public safety, better public safety outcomes. And Jennifer's presentation tomorrow is going to focus heavily on why that's the case. Okay, what are the diversion options that we have out there? All the world is divided into two, pre-booking and post-booking. Pre-booking is Intercept 1. That is, crisis intervention team programs and law enforcement focused programs that identify people at the outset and charges are never filed. Pre-booking. There allegedly are about 900 communities in the United States that have crisis intervention teams. The term is used very loosely, and some of them really are formally trained. They've had 40 hours of training. There's all the support. And some of them had CIT Light, L-I-T-E, as in Miller Lite. And the post-booking may be court-based, it may be jail-based, it may be community corrections-based. And I'm going to go through a little bit of data that exists on this, and this, and this, and this. And it's going to be once over lightly, because I only have a short period of time, and you don't need all of the details. So you need to get a flavor for what's out there so you can decide what you want to believe in, what you don't want to believe in. Okay, very little data on CIT programs. What CIT programs are intended to do are two big things. One is reduce negative outcomes of harm to the person who's been called for, or for the police officers or anybody else. The other is to avoid arrest. This is a study we did in Birmingham, Knoxville, and Memphis. Memphis is the founding location for crisis intervention team in 1987. And we looked at 100 mentally ill, presumed mentally ill calls that came into the call center. And Birmingham had a team that wasn't a CIT team, but were social workers that went out. They were co-responders. And I know LA over the years has had a co-responder model in parts, some parts of LA County. And Knoxville just had an emergency mental health team. It wasn't a CIT team. It was just a mobile mental health crisis team. And what we were particularly interested in, what percentage of all of these 100 calls result in arrest? And we see that Memphis only had 2% of the calls that resulted in arrest, that they were resolved on the scene or they were taken to a treatment location. So there's not a lot of research out there in terms of what impact the CIT really have, in part because it's very hard research to do. It's hard to identify, would you have arrested this person if you didn't bring them to the treatment location? Would you have arrested them if you hadn't been able to resolve it successfully on site? So there's not a lot of data on CIT teams as an effective outcome. One other study that Jennifer was involved in with one of her graduate students, I think, a while back in Las Vegas, showed the same sort of low percentage of arrests. They had a lot of hospitalization there, which was rather surprising. And of those that were hospitalized, 71% involuntary hospitalization. I don't think that's a typical outcome of most CIT programs around the US. But the very low arrest rate is that crisis intervention teams do avoid arrest. And if that's your outcome measure, they're very successful. And when you look at use of force, there's, I forget whether it was in this study, Jennifer, or somebody else's, they looked at use of force by CIT teams, and it's very low compared to regular police intervention. Okay, that's Intercept 1. Now let's look a little bit at Intercept 2, which, let me editorialize, I think this is the least used with the, woo, that really is breathless. I don't know what I did. But I think that this Intercept 2 is the most overlooked portion in the US. There are very few bail bond-based diversion programs in Intercept 2, and I think it's one that could be very effectively used. The concept is, if you look at people, this is from Rikers Island, and this will make the point. This is recent data from the Council of State Governments, a report just a month or so ago. And they looked at 48,000 people who were on Rikers Island who had been identified as mentally ill, who had stayed 3 days or longer. And the percentage of people that did not have any mental illness, 21% made bail, and they made bail on an average of 9 days. Of those who were identified as mentally ill, 12% made bail, and if they made bail, it took 48 days to make it happen. So that if you don't make bail, you stay in jail. You accumulate 48 jail days, even if you make bail, compared to 9 if you do. So the whole bail process is much slower. I think someone asked a question earlier in terms of what happens, why does that happen? Well, basically in the US, to make bail, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm a sociologist, but there's 2 factors. Are you a danger to public safety, and are you likely to show up for your court date? Well, a lot of the people we're talking about have had a lot of prior criminal justice contact, and because of the life circumstances, the cognitive processes, everything, they don't show up for the court dates. There's transportation, they forget, all kinds of things going on in their life that make it really hard to show up. So they accumulate a whole bunch of failure to appear warrants. So when they get arrested, they're not good candidates for bail, unless there's some support system out there that would ensure, A, that there wouldn't be a public safety risk, and B, that they will show up for your court date. 5 minutes? Oh, wow. Okay. Other data on mental illness, from Rikers Island, people without mental illness average 61 days, with mental illness 112 days. And I forget, Dr. Southard, I think, said that. In every jail in the US. Because of bail, very much. Okay. Oh, we're really going. Let's skip that. Let's look. This is a jail diversion study, post-book diversion program. People all had criminal charges filed. 14 sites. And the question was, in a 1-year follow-up, in the year before they came in, everybody got arrested because it was post-booking diversion. 50%. And you say, is that a 50% got arrested? What a terrible figure. Well, it's half of what it was the year before. And the mean number of arrests post-enrollment was 1 compared to 2.3. And jail days average 33 compared to 49. Very successful on all the measures that you would want for a jail diversion program. This is mental health court data. I don't know whether this is what David wants to talk to me about. But this was from 3 mental health courts. It's not the Santa Clara data. San Francisco, Minneapolis, and Indianapolis. And we had a treatment as usual group and a mental health court enrollee group. And they averaged number of arrests 18 months before, 2.2, 1.4 for a 37% reduction. The treatment as usual group also went down, but not nearly as much, and that's a statistically significant difference. And in the let's see, since I'm running out of time. Quick question on the logic model. We said we wanted to get public health outcomes and we wanted public safety outcomes. Public health outcomes from these data are actually pretty strong. Looking at drug and alcohol use, any alcohol use in the last 30 days when they were interviewed in this diversion program at baseline, 60% basically said they did, and in 6 months after, 28 and 30%. And one of the things you see in these public health outcomes is all of the positive outcomes happen in the next 6 months and then they're maintained. There's not a lot of change from 6 to 12, but from 0 to 6, when they first get enrolled, when the acuity is probably the highest, they have really favorable outcomes. Alcohol to intoxication, they reported 38%, went down to 13%. Illegal drug use, 58% said they had used when they came in the last 30 days, and it was 15, 16, and 17%. So when you look at drug and alcohol use, it goes down. When you look at activities of daily living, in fact, the mean score with 4 being extreme difficulty, they start at 2, and they get improvement at 6 and at 12 months. Looking at symptoms from the Colorado Symptom Index at baseline, the highest, if you had 60, you were in really bad shape. It's about 31, an improvement at 22 and 21. So these jail diversion programs were getting public health as well as public safety improvement. Well, we don't have time to do the cost data. Okay, this is the controversial part, and I'll finish with this. I would pose to you that to be effective advocates for us to change the system and to move things and get more diversion, that the conversation is not helped a lot by using the word criminalization. First of all, because it's a very imprecise term, and if you look at the literature, it means 2 completely different things depending on who's talking about it. One is that there's a higher percentage of people with mental illness in jails today and prisons today than there were 30 or 40 years ago. There's no data. No one has any data on how many people in the 60s and 70s and 80s were in U.S. jails and prisons with serious mental illness. No one ever counted it till then. So we don't know. In the early 1980s, a personal experience, we were doing a study of jail mental health programs. We had an NIMH grant, and we were interviewing people. And I think it's okay to say, I was in Contra Costa Jail. And we were interviewing people saying, are things different now than they were 10 years ago in terms of how you respond to people with serious mental illness? Do you have more people with serious mental illness in your jail today? He said, and the deputy for supervision said, I don't think we do. He said, 10 years ago, if someone started acting out, we threw them in the hole. Today we call a psychologist. And that really impacted on me as a personal anecdote, he didn't feel that his jail had a significantly different number of people, but the identification and response was different. The other thing, so one way it's used is that we've trans-institutionalized, and the question from the floor earlier, that's the definition. The other is, if a person encounters law enforcement at this point, are they more likely to be arrested now than they used to be, or in some cities or in some parts of cities than others? So it means different things. But I think it's a blaming tool. When you talk to, if I know we have a mix of criminal justice professionals, behavioral health professionals, students, and a lot of different people here. But when you say we're criminalizing mentally ill, that immediately puts blame on the criminal justice system, on law enforcement. And it's not a way to develop partnerships. And I think that I prefer to think about the concept in terms of how do we reduce the involvement? How do we minimize the inappropriate penetration? It's nice to have a single word that you can use that captures all of that, but I think decriminalization is a word that gets in the way of creating the partnerships that you need to do. And the issue is, how do we reduce the involvement, the unnecessary and inappropriate involvement of persons with mental illness? How do we avoid the penetration into the system? How do we work at intercept 1 or intercept 2 and not wait till they get to 3, 4, or 5? And so I would just suggest that for your consideration as I wrap up, and I think my time's up.
Hi, my name is Brenda. How I wish, thank you, Ellen, for inviting me here. How I wish I would have heard about these programs when I was facing problems in my life. I'm a product of being arrested because of something I did. I'm schizophrenic, and I went to prison for 3 years. And I didn't know about mental health court at all. I never heard of that. This is the first I've ever heard of that. And one of the things that I remember very clearly is that at my interview, my assessment, when I was in jail, that was a 5-minute process. The gentleman asked me a series of questions that, I was so nervous and so scared to be there to begin with. And his assessment it took 5 minutes for him to say that I was competent to go through the court process. During that whole process, I was in this cloud where I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why I was there. It was very horrible. And my arrest was because I had a fake driver's license and I was trying to buy a motorcycle with it. My life now is just completely changed because there was a program that came and talked to the judge and tried to see if I can get some type of mental health services while I was in jail. And I did do that, and I also did have like a 5-year sentence waived if I didn't complete a diversity program. To this day now, I'm a college student, and and thank you. And my whole existence now is to help people who are in situations like the one I was in. And I want to be an advocate for people who have mental health issues that are being arrested and are not being looked at with a magnifying glass, with the length time to be able to assess them and have the programs to come in and say, okay, you know what? They did something that this is not really a big crime, but we need to find out why they did that.
Thank you. That's why these programs can work, because of people like you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm not sure how to follow that question. I wanted to ask about, could you describe some of the level 5 programs? Because I've seen the police ones and the CIT and the jail diversion things, but we have lots and lots of people on probation, then that reoffending thing, or they miss their appointment with the parole officer, probation, and with lots of them spinning around. And we're going to have a lot more of that with the AB 109 people. And I wonder, what are some examples of programs that look like that, and how do they work?
I'm going to defer that program because Jen Skeem's presentation this afternoon, I think it's the first one after lunch maybe, is specific to that. She's going to have a whole bunch of data and she'll really address that. So let's hold that if we can.
Oh, thanks for your presentation. I just wanted to make a comment on the community partnerships issue, which you touched upon. In our siloed world, it's very difficult often to bring together partners that might be useful from social services, faith-based services, mental health, and so forth. And we've been involved, I just wanted to briefly comment, in a randomized trial with DMH and other partners in Los Angeles County of the added value of a community partnership approach around mental health problems, particularly depression, over and above providing technical assistance to address those issues. What happens if you really bring together different partners? And we have found at the client level improved mental health, physical health, reduced homelessness, risk factors like food insecurity, and also reduced hospitalizations. And the community in doing this trial really insisted that we include prisoner reentry programs, and because they were very concerned about the growing rates of of arrests and being in prison and so forth in their population. So I think, we have direct evidence that there is a lot of added value from these kinds of programs. But then how do you really establish those partnerships between the community partnerships, the criminal justice system, and get the model there where people are sharing with each other, how should we be addressing this from a criminal justice perspective, the clinical perspective, the community cultural perspective. Somehow we have to find the will and the leadership to pull these things together. So I just wanted to thank you for raising that issue and briefly make that comment. Steve.
Thank you. No, it's an absolutely essential ingredient in any community in the United States where we've seen successful program development to keep people out of the criminal justice system or move them more quickly back to community-based treatment. You see working coalitions that represent a whole array of behavioral health, criminal justice, peer support, family members, and they meet regularly, they meet monthly, they always meet around food. Breakfast, lunch, people show up, and it's an essential ingredient. I would just second what you said. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm a patient's rights advocate in Santa Clara County, and one thing I see on the ground is that folks who are in mental health court end up stuck in jail a long time after they've been released, technically, still waiting for a bed to open or waiting for a placement. Is there any sort of data on that catch within the specialty courts?
Yes, and when we did the study with the 3 courts, Santa Clara was part of it, but then we couldn't get some of the data. But that was one of the eye-openers to us that we had and we didn't expect. We thought people came in, a week or so later, they were identified as candidates, the treatment team would evaluate them, and in 2 or 3 weeks, they would be enrolled in the court, and then they would be out. That isn't the way it happens at all. And we had people whose their target arrest for the mental health court enrollment was a year, 18 months, because they had gone to a drug court, they weren't doing well in a drug court, and they got transferred to the mental health court. And in fact, we saw over and over again people in housing was the kicker. You said bed, but housing, that they would be enrolled in the mental health court and they would be sent back till the treatment plan was ready to be implemented, and the thing that would stick them in jail, and they would be accumulating a lot of extra jail days because they couldn't find adequate housing that meet the treatment plan requirements. So I think it's a very common feature that we were very surprised to see and hadn't expected. And when you look at mental health court outcome, I don't think it's something people tend to look at in terms of what's the length of time between when they actually get enrolled and when they hit the street. But a very important point. Thank you.
I'm a family member, and when I was looking at your statistic about the number of days that someone is bailed out, well, a lot of times I know that 48 is because a lot of times our family members are missing to us. We find them in jail, and right then that's the safest place until we can try to convince someone to maybe do a diversion, which doesn't happen a lot of times. But that's the reason why I think that number is higher, is because, there's nothing out there to help them. If we let them out at that point, they're going to go right back and, end up arrested again. And another question, I know you said you weren't a lawyer, but I've been told that mental illness is not a defense when I've tried to advocate for my son, and I would like someone to maybe answer that. Is that true?
What was the defense?
Mental illness is not a defense.
You don't want to raise that as a defense because it will get you. The payoff of that is if you ended up actually being successful, the not guilty by reason of insanity, that would be a very bad thing, and you end up in the system for a long, long time, and it's hard to do. You'd use a lot of resources. So in general, you don't want to use that as an effective alternative. You want to say, because of that, let's figure out a disposition and some sort of creative disposition that will take that into account, where we can respond to that in a community-based setting under proper supervision so that they're not incarcerated and they don't get embedded further in the system that they don't need to be.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. One of the comments or one of the points that you made that was really impactful to me was the relationship between recent or history of abuse and trauma, both physical and sexual abuse, for most of the offenders or most of the people that were ending up in the system. So one of my questions is, how are we, or are you aware of programs or the implications of treating offenders of abuse, and really the need that's also showing up there? I think it's a a full range problem, or a problem that has many different sides in terms of being able to intervene if active abuse is happening, prevent, and then treat both the trauma as a result of the abuse and the abuser who's often also been the recipient of such abuse. So are there programs or part of the diversion that address those components, and are they effective?
There are programs that are trauma-specific intervention programs that are actually being delivered in jail settings. You have to adapt the modules that they have often. The groups need to be open, not closed, because in fact people are coming and going, and you can't necessarily do the modules exactly in the way they're manualized, because it doesn't work with people coming and going in the groups. And then the community-based programs, those trauma-specific intervention programs, TREM, Seeking Safety, some of them, they seem to work as well with persons who have justice involvement as not justice involvement. So I think if they're in the community, I think those they're not really evidence-based practice yet. They're not a big evidence base, but they're promising practices, and they're manualized. I think that those would be appropriate, and then they're adapting them for use with people that are incarcerated.
Hi, I work in the county mental health, and there's a program that, while we technically don't have mental health court, we do have court linkage. And I'm here with my colleagues. We are in all of the superior courts, and when we're called in by the judge or a public defender or family members, it de facto becomes a mental health court. We work as a team. And then you have, a lot of times, the case is being followed through the duration of probation. And this is, you know, a team effort. It can be very effective because there's that accountability. It kind of gives teeth to the treatment for a person who, you know, chronically mentally ill might not really want to be involved in that. There's a lot of county mental health and treatment can become management, and so people don't always want to be managed. I think in terms of effectiveness, when you've got these systems coming together, and some of the things that people have brought up, that's where a system gets stuck, waiting for a bed to open up. I think a lot of the solution is putting the money into this population so that there's more programming, there's more beds, there's more availability, there's more support for the people who are giving the treatment so that they aren't overwhelmed. So I think it's really putting it as a society, making this population a priority and spending money on them.
And just a footnote I would add, because time, we got to get to the next session, I think. But I think that how you sell what you're talking about, and it sounds so powerful and so successful, is unfortunately you have to sell it not as good public health, but as good public safety. Mm-hmm. And then that's what you end up having to do.
Not only good public safety, but also good math quotation, because anybody who knows about the criminal justice system knows that revolving door costs not only in human life, but also in the budget that we have to help them. And it's a problem with criminalization or decriminalization or deinstitutionalization, is the fact that if we don't do prevention and intervention, if we don't do the intervention when you involve family members, caregivers, because who are the ultimate caregivers? The family members. But what happens with the family members? They disconnect, because once that person is an adult, you have no right to be able to help them. So it's as if somebody gets in a car accident, he's lying on the street, and you tell him, hey, you know what, you got to get up and get yourself to the hospital. The idea that a family member or a caregiver cannot assist the loved one is an issue that we can't talk about today because it's too long and involves too many discussions. But at the same time, I'm with NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness. Orange County spoke. I'm with LA County, NAMI West Side LA. We have an initiative to help do a pilot program to show, and Dr. Souther has been wonderful, and Dr. Maber have been wonderful, to see that the family involvement, the family assistance, the safety net that someone has when there is someone there to help them. Because as you hear and hear and hear stories, this is an illness you cannot do by yourself. You need a total support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your day.
Thank you.